They said kids like you don't belong here. That sentence clung to Maya Johnson like a streak of rain down her back. But this morning, it would no longer have the power to define her. Detroit rain fell in the manner of a city too used to winter, not loud, not theatrical, just persistent, like an old habit the sky refused to break. Maya hunched her small shoulders inside a faded gray coat, clutching a worn blue spiral notebook against her chest. The cover was frayed, the wire bent, but it was her talisman, the one object that reminded her, you still have a place to write. Beside her stood Evelyn Johnson, her mother, a night shift nurse's aide whose voice was still rough from hours of whispering to patients. She held an umbrella with one broken rib. Together they paused under the marble portico of St. Aurelius Academy, staring up at the tall white columns and polished steps that reflected the slate sky. The brass plaque at the entrance bore illustrious names: donors, alumni, Nobel medalists. Maya had read some of them once, in tiny side columns of the library newspaper. A cold wind swept down the corridor, carrying the smell of waxed floors and new paper. "You ready, baby?" Evelyn asked, standing straighter despite fatigue. Maya nodded. She pressed the notebook tighter against her chest. Her ritual, 2 fingers on the metal spiral, a tap, a breath. That was how she called calm back to herself. The guard behind the glass booth scanned them with a practiced glance. The broken umbrella, the wet coat, the scuffed sneakers. His eyes stopped on the guest pass. Evelyn slid across the counter. "Deliveries go through the side entrance," he muttered, as if repeating a line too often spoken. "My daughter is here for the scholarship exam. 10 o'clock, Evelyn said, steady. The guard hesitated, typed something, and finally, a dull beep released the turnstile. "Go ahead. Don't drip on the floor." He didn't smile. The main hall was like a museum. Glass cases of trophies and medals, black and white photographs framed in oak. The marble tiles swirled with intricate veins. Maya's gaze snagged on them, recognizing a Fibonacci spiral in the stone itself. Without thinking, she matched her steps to the sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. "Maya," her mother whispered. She blinked, smiled sheepishly, and quickened her pace. At the reception desk sat Ms. Hannigan, typing briskly, her glasses flashing under fluorescent light. "Scholarship exam?" she asked, drawing out scholarship as though it were borrowed jewelry. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Her name is Maya Johnson." Keys clattered, pause, more clatter. "She's registered. But this is the accelerated program. The material is well above grade level." Her smile was thin. "Don't worry, most families figure out quickly whether this is the right fit." Maya didn't answer. She slipped her notebook open just long enough to see a page crowded with curves and arrows, algebra folding into geometry, and a tiny note in her own handwriting. "If beauty can be proven, it chooses the shortest path." She shut the cover again. Ms. Hannigan handed them 2 slips of paper. "Testing room at the end of the corridor, left side." "Parents aren't allowed in. There's a waiting area opposite the library, though." Her eyes flicked to the umbrella. "You might prefer somewhere more convenient." "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice level. In the center of the hall stood a bronze statue, a man holding an open book, the other hand raised as if sketching equations in the air. The inscription read, "Nathaniel Brooks, class of 1994. Mathematics turns noise into music." Maya froze. She remembered the name from an old clipping in the library, a mathematician now serving both as professor and civic advisor. She touched the engraved words, "Turn noise into music." That was what she had been doing for years on the peeling walls of their apartment, chalk and pencil against the background clatter of pipes and radios, finding rhythm inside chaos. Along the wall, framed portraits of past math team champions gleamed. One face recurred, Alex Brooks, with the same angular brows as the statue, holding trophies with a confident smile. 3-time state champion. The surname echoed. Coincidence? Or a lineage written in marble and metal? Maya hugged her notebook closer. The waiting room was smaller, plainer. A table offered paper cups and tissues. 3 other candidates sat apart, uniforms pressed, shoes polished. One blonde girl glanced at Maya's worn coat, then whispered something to her friend. Maya caught only fragments. Scholarship. Back door. "You want some water?" Evelyn asked. "No. Your hands are cold." "I'm fine." "You always say that." Evelyn sighed softly. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of paper, and handed it over. "Write down whatever you need to remember. Not answers, just what keeps you steady." Maya unfolded it, balanced it on her knee, and scribbled, "Begin with the clearest thing." Her own mantra, learned from nights of wrestling with too long problems. The door opened. A woman with hair neatly coiled stepped in. Victoria Grant. Mathematics read her badge. Her heels tapped out an exact rhythm. Her rimless glasses sharpened her gaze. "The exam begins at 10 sharp, she announced. 3 hours, no phones, no notes, no aids." Her eyes landed on Maya's notebook. "Put that away." Maya hesitated a heartbeat, then slid it into her backpack. "There may be many approaches," Grant continued, "but what we value here is standardization. Scholarship is not tricks or flourishes. It is discipline. Standardization. To Maya, it sounded like one road only. Yet her entire life had been built on alternatives. Neighbors turning closets into kitchens, families dividing living rooms into bedrooms. Necessity had taught her invention. She simply nodded. When Ms. Grant reached her, she asked curtly, "Name?" "Maya Johnson." "School?" "Gratiot Public." A pause. The name clearly lay outside her mental catalog. "Fine. Remember, clean work, proper format. We do not grade mysteries." "Mom will wait in the library if they let me," Evelyn whispered, rising. "If not, I'll find a bench. Don't worry about me, just remember the snack." Maya smiled faintly, recalling the red lunchbox in her bag. 2 thin peanut butter sandwiches, 1 small apple, and a napkin folded into the shape of a crane. Small things, but enough. 9:31. A group of students passed by the glass doors, sweaters pressed, ties striped, shoes polished to mirrors. A tall boy glanced in, caught sight of Maya, then at the sign reading scholarship examination. He chuckled, not loud, but with the air of an inside joke. He pointed at a trophy photo in the hall. Alex Brooks again, golden cup in hand. State 2023. Proven theorem. Maya was still a conjecture. The exam room opened. White light spilled out. Rows of desks stood apart, each under the eye of a camera. A clock hung high, its second hand gliding smoothly. "Seat 3, Ms. Grant ordered. Maya sat. The chair was slightly tall, her feet just brushing the ground. She placed her backpack beneath the desk, laid out her pencil, and divided her scratch paper into 2 columns. Ideas on one side, paths on the other. In the corner, she wrote 3 tiny words: clear, short, beautiful. 9:58. Test packets were laid face down. The smell of fresh ink rose. Maya thought of their apartment wall, coated with layers of chalk equations. Thought of her younger brother, Malik, probably at the neighbors watching cartoons while fiddling with a broken toy car. Thought of her mother, maybe denied entry to the library, sitting instead in a hallway chair, eyes closed but ears tuned for the sound of this very door. She remembered her mother's words that morning, tightening her shoelaces. "No one gives us permission. You sign your own." 9:59. The clock's hand slipped toward 12. "Begin." Pages flipped. Maya opened hers. 15 problems, 3 hours, 2 electives. The first stared at her with a challenge, a proof by contradiction in algebra. She breathed once, wrote the assumption of its negation. But before ink touched fully, she paused. She tapped her finger twice on the page, her ritual beat, like a drummer marking time. Everything has rhythm, even fear. Then she began to write, and the cold gate behind her shut completely, leaving only paper, pencil, and an 11-year-old girl preparing to turn noise into music. Exams, at their best, are supposed to measure. This one, Maya would soon realize, had been built to filter. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Cameras blinked in their corners, mechanical eyes recording every twitch of a pencil. A wall clock ticked with brutal consistency, the sound of a gavel striking, minute after minute. Maya bent over the first problem. Assume the statement is false. Her pencil traced out the structure. Her hand did not tremble, though her knees wanted to. The logic unfolded in her mind like stepping stones across a stream. Assume the opposite. Follow it through, arrive at absurdity, and the original must stand. She had done proofs like this on the back of envelopes, on the margins of old bills, even once on a napkin salvaged from a diner. This was familiar territory. She finished the first problem in under 10 minutes. She glanced up. The other candidates were still bent over, brows furrowed, pencils scratching hesitantly. A tiny current of confidence flickered inside her, enough to warm her fingertips. The second problem was longer, a combinatorics challenge dressed up in careful phrasing. She smiled faintly. It was almost playful, like a riddle whispered through layers of disguise. She peeled it back, rearranged terms, and the answer settled neatly. Another check mark. By the half-hour mark, Maya was halfway through the test. That was when she felt it. The weight of eyes. She lifted her head. Ms. Grant was watching her, arms folded, expression unreadable. The teacher's gaze slid from Maya's page to the clock, then back again, as if taking mental notes. Maya lowered her eyes quickly. Her heart tapped faster, but her pencil kept moving. An hour passed. She had reached a geometry proof that danced on the edge of impossibility. A circle inscribed in a triangle, tangents at peculiar points, a symmetry that seemed too elegant to be coincidence. Most students would have labored for an hour, but to Maya, patterns whispered. She saw the equal lengths, the hidden parallels, the way two angles completed each other like long-lost siblings. Within 15 minutes, she had written a full, clean proof. Her pencil paused. She could almost hear the murmur of chalk on her apartment wall, the whisper of her own late-night practice. She turned her page, eager for the next problem, and froze. Problem 9. It was not mathematics. It was nonsense. The text was written in dense, tangled sentences, with multiple negations and half-translated symbols. Maya squinted. At first, she thought it was her fatigue. But no, the question itself was flawed. Two definitions contradicted each other. A symbol introduced in line 3 disappeared in line 6. She looked around. The other 3 candidates were hunched lower, brows crumpled, chewing pencils. One boy rubbed his temple in frustration. The blonde girl whispered something like, "What the hell?" before catching herself. Maya reread it carefully. No, it was not solvable, at least not as written, which meant, what? A test should measure clarity, not confusion. But here, in the middle of an elite academy's scholarship exam, sat a problem designed to trap to prove not brilliance, but obedience. Who would follow the rules and grind through anyway, even when the rules made no sense? Her fingers tightened around the pencil. She heard Ms. Grant's earlier words. We value standardization, discipline, not tricks. Was this the trick? A false problem slipped in to see who would conform? Maya tapped her notebook rhythm on the desk. 1, 2, think. What is the clearest thing? The clearest thing was this. Mathematics could not contradict itself. If a problem contradicted, the error lay in its writing, not in the discipline itself. So she wrote. On her scratch sheet, she carefully copied the flawed statement, then lined through the contradictory terms. In the margin, she rewrote it, clean, correcting the notation. Only then did she solve the corrected version, step by step. Her answer was precise, boxed neatly. And at the bottom of the page, she added a sentence. The original problem as written is invalid. Solution provided to corrected form. It was a risk, boldness or arrogance. She could not tell, but she would rather defend clarity than pretend nonsense was truth. 2 hours in. Maya's pile of finished pages grew. The apple from her lunchbox sat untouched in her bag. Her pencil lead wore thin. Problem 13 was brutal. A probability distribution over multiple stages, more a puzzle for graduate students than middle schoolers. But she approached it with the calm of someone who had watched raindrops split and merge on a window pane, who had learned to map random noise into hidden order. She treated each outcome like a path in one of Malik's toy mazes. By the time the others were still mapping first cases, she had written a full solution. Problem 14, another monster. This time it demanded not just calculation, but creativity. Find not an answer, but all possible answers, and prove completeness. Maya smiled despite herself. This was where she thrived, not following roads but mapping landscapes. She worked methodically, enumerating possibilities, then proving why the set was closed. It was like arranging a family of notes into a song, each one necessary, none missing. At 2 hours and 40 minutes, she turned the last page. Problem 15. An open proof. No unique solution. The kind designed to test endurance, not just skill. She began anyway. Her pencil moved like a violin bow, finding rhythm. She could not finish entirely, but she wrote far enough to show direction, an approach clear and promising. Time. The word cracked the silence. Pencils dropped. Papers shuffled. Ms. Grant moved down the rows, collecting packets. When she reached Maya's desk, her eyes flicked over the neatly stacked pages, the crossed-out problem 9, the bold annotation. Her lips thinned. Pack up, she said curtly. Maya slid her pencil into her bag. Her fingers trembled now, the adrenaline wearing off. Outside the exam room, the waiting area seemed louder, filled with parents' voices, the hum of the heater. Evelyn was there, sitting upright in a plastic chair, eyes alert despite exhaustion. She rose the moment Maya emerged. How was it? She asked. Maya hesitated. Then she smiled faintly. Clear, short, beautiful, she said, the words she had written on her scratch sheet. But her eyes betrayed the truth. The test had been tilted. Later, as they left the building, Maya glanced once more at the bronze statue in the hall. Mathematics turns noise into music. She wondered, what if the academy itself preferred the noise? What if it feared the music that someone like her could play? Rain had eased outside. The marble steps gleamed wet. Evelyn opened the broken umbrella anyway, shielding her daughter. Together they walked out, leaving the cold gate behind. But Maya knew. This was only the beginning. The exam was over. For most children, that would have been the end of the ordeal. But for Maya Johnson, the real test was only beginning. One held not on paper, but in whispers, in reputations, and in a room where her voice would not be invited. The following Monday, St. Aurelius Academy held its weekly faculty council. The conference chamber was nothing like the classrooms where students sat on stiff chairs. This room was wood-paneled, with tall windows spilling daylight across a long, polished table. Brass lamps glowed dimly even in the afternoon, as though the room itself insisted on formality. At the center sat Headmaster Richard Alden, a man of careful posture and careful words, whose tailored suit matched the dark sheen of the mahogany table. Around him gathered department chairs, senior teachers, and a few influential trustees who made their presence felt even in silence. The stack of scholarship exam results lay in front of Alden, clipped neatly. The score sheets had already been tallied by assistants. What remained was not grading, but judgment. "Shall we begin?" Alden asked, tapping the folder lightly. His voice was calm, measured, but beneath it lay something sterner, the understanding that this academy was not just a school, but a gatekeeper of pedigree. Ms. Victoria Grant adjusted her glasses. She had arrived early, papers bristling with annotations. "Before we speak of scores," she said, "I want to note irregularities." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Proceed," Alden allowed. Grant opened her folder. Candidate Johnson, public school background, mother employed in custodial health care, no preparatory pedigree. She looked up as though those facts were indictment enough. She completed the exam unusually fast. In fact, she finished half the paper while the others were still on their first 3 problems. Either she had access to the test beforehand. Several murmurs stirred at the table. Grant continued. Or she was coached in ways not available to her peers. Professor Nathaniel Brooks, chair of mathematics and the Academy's most respected intellectual figure, leaned forward slightly. His hair was peppered with gray at the temples, his gaze sharp, but not unkind. "Or," he said softly, "she is genuinely extraordinary." Grant's lips tightened. "Extraordinary does not explain her annotation on problem 9. At that, a few brows rose. Alden turned to Grant. "Explain." "She wrote that the problem was invalid," Grant said crisply. "Crossed out terms, rewrote the question, then solved her own corrected version. That shows not ingenuity, but arrogance. We test discipline." She refused to play by the rules. "Or," Brooks countered, "she recognized an error that our examiners overlooked." "That is not her place," Grant snapped. Silence followed. For a moment, even the brass clock on the wall seemed to pause. One of the trustees, Mr. Harrington, silver hair, old money, cleared his throat. "This scholarship is not charity. It is an investment in the Academy's reputation. If we admit a child who later fails, we bear the stain." "Quite right," another trustee murmured. Brooks spread his hands gently across the table, as though placing down an invisible map. "Gentlemen, with respect, reputation does not come only from safety. It comes from vision. What if we are standing at the edge of a discovery? The girl's proofs were not only correct, they were elegant. She solved a distribution problem that even our seniors struggle with." Grant interjected, "And yet she dismissed standardization entirely." Brooks met her gaze. "Mathematics is not bureaucracy, Victoria. It is truth. If the truth contradicts the format, then the format must bend." A hush fell. Alden lifted the folder, scanning the score sheets. "Her raw score is the highest by a margin of 12%. That is not trivial." He looked up. "And yet the question remains, can a child from her background thrive in this environment? Or will we set her up to fail?" That is precisely my concern, Grant said quickly. We will be blamed when she falters. Better to spare her and us the spectacle. Brooks's voice grew firmer. No, that is not sparing. That is erasure. He tapped the table once. If talent blooms in concrete, do we pluck it out because it lacks a garden pedigree? She deserves soil, light, and room to grow. If we deny her, we betray not her, but the very principle this academy pretends to honor. There was a silence, heavy as a storm. Then, from the far end, a younger teacher spoke, a woman from the science faculty, Ms. Patel. She had been quiet until now, fingers intertwined, eyes thoughtful. I looked at her scratch work, she said softly. It was different. She organized her page into ideas and paths. I have never seen a student that young impose such discipline on chaos. If we fear her difference, we fear the future. Grant scoffed. Sentiment. Observation, Patel replied evenly. The debate spiraled. Trustees weighed prestige. Teachers worried about precedent. Grant hammered on about discipline, while Brooks countered with genius. Finally, Alden raised his hand. Silence returned. This council is divided, but we cannot remain so. The exam exists to identify excellence, wherever it hides. If we dismiss candidate Johnson, we risk appearing not rigorous, but fearful. He paused, his gaze flicking to the trustees. Fear does not serve legacy. One by one, reluctant nods followed. Very well, Alden said. Maya Johnson will be admitted on scholarship. Grant exhaled sharply, lips pressed thin. On probation, then. On probation, Alden agreed. Her place here will be conditional. One misstep and she will be withdrawn. Understood? The council murmured assent. The decision was recorded. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped. But as the room emptied, Brooks lingered. He stood by the window, looking out at the rain that had begun again, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. He remembered his own childhood, scribbling equations on scraps while his father worked double shifts in a factory. He remembered how a single teacher had saved him, choosing to see brilliance rather than disobedience. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to repay that debt. Behind him, Victoria Grant gathered her folders, eyes flashing. You've saddled us with a liability, she hissed quietly as she passed. Brooks didn't answer. He was still watching the rain, hearing in its steady rhythm something else, the faint echo of a child's pencil, writing not just answers, but defiance, on paper too fragile to contain it. And in a small apartment across the city, Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, Malik beside her, chalk dust clouding the wall. She had no idea her fate had just been sealed in a paneled room of doubters and defenders. All she knew was that another problem had given up its secret, and she was already reaching for the next. The dawn of Maya Johnson's first day at St. Aurelius Academy came colder than winter had any right to be. Frost clung to the cracked windows of her family's small apartment, drawing fragile white veins over the glass. The city outside stirred in tired rhythms, delivery trucks groaning down the block, a dog barking at shadows, the hiss of steam rising from rusted grates. Maya stood by the kitchen sink, fastening the last button on her too large uniform blouse. Her mother had spent hours altering the second-hand fabric, sewing with exhausted fingers after her night shift, but the blazer still sagged at the shoulders, its sleeves swallowing half her hands. You look perfect, her mother whispered, though her eyes glistened. Maya smiled faintly. She didn't feel perfect. She felt like a coin dropped into the wrong fountain. But she nodded, tucked her notebooks into a worn backpack, and kissed her little brother's forehead before stepping into the brittle morning. The academy gates loomed like something carved from another world. Iron filigree twisted upward into sharp points, polished so bright they caught the sun in brief, merciless flashes. Beyond them, the grounds stretched immaculate, trimmed hedges, marble statues, a fountain frozen into stillness. A line of glossy black cars pulled up one after another, releasing children who looked like they belonged in magazines rather than classrooms. Their coats were wool, their shoes leather, their laughter the sound of people who had never known hunger. Maya walked the last blocks from the bus stop, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the frosted pavement. When she reached the gate, the guard on duty eyed her student ID twice before opening it. His silence spoke louder than any words. "You don't belong here." She clutched her backpack straps tighter and stepped through. Inside, St. Aurelius smelled of polish and history. Marble floors reflected chandeliers. Portraits of founders lined the halls, each painted face a reminder of lineage and legacy. Her footsteps echoed too loudly, as though even sound itself knew she was out of place. Whispers rose like drafts behind her. "That's her." "The charity case. She doesn't look that smart." Maya kept her eyes on the campus map folded in her hand, tracing the path to room 204, Advanced Mathematics. Her mother's voice lingered in her mind. "Head high, baby. Numbers don't care where you come from." But people did. Room 204 already buzzed with the energy of students returning from holiday. Desks gleamed with new tablets. A 3D printer hummed quietly in the corner, extruding a geometric model. The air itself seemed charged with competition. Maya slipped into a middle seat, hoping to disappear. But silence spread the moment she sat down. Heads turned, phones rose. The scholarship student was no longer rumor. She was flesh and bone. From the front row, a boy stood with casual grace. His uniform fit as though tailored in Savile Row, his blonde hair combed with precision, his blue eyes glacial. He smiled without warmth. "So you're the girl who beat the exam." His voice carried across the room, sharp enough to draw laughter from his entourage. Maya met his gaze. "I solved it, that's all." The boy's smile thinned. "Name's Alex Whitmore, 3-time regional math champion, captain of this year's team. You'll find things harder here than at wherever you came from." "She came from Jefferson Public," someone whispered. Snickers followed. Maya lowered her eyes to the desk, though not in surrender. She had already noted 2 flaws in the equations scrawled on the board. At precisely 8 o'clock, the classroom door opened with the crisp authority of heels on marble. Victoria Grant entered, her tailored suit immaculate, her smile honed like a scalpel. She set a folder on the podium, her eyes sweeping the class before fixing on Maya. "Class," she said sweetly, "we have a new addition, Maya Johnson, here on a full scholarship." She let the word scholarship drip like honey laced with venom. "Please be patient as she adjusts. Our pace may prove challenging." A ripple of laughter. Maya said nothing. "Now," Grant continued, "let's begin. Mr. Whitmore, would you solve problem 1? Alex rose smoothly, taking the stylus. The problem was a multivariable optimization, a task designed to intimidate. He worked through it flawlessly, his handwriting clean, his process mechanical perfection. "Excellent, as always," Grant purred. Then she turned. "Miss Johnson, problem 2. Every gaze pinned her. Maya's throat tightened. She recognized the problem instantly, a proof not normally assigned until university courses. A deliberate trap. She rose, walked to the board, and began. Her method was not the textbook approach. Instead of trudging through 20 weary steps, she unfolded the problem like origami, each fold revealing a hidden shape. Lines curved into spirals, shortcuts blooming into clarity. Whispers filled the room. She's skipping steps. No, look, it works. Wait, is she serious? Halfway through, Grant cut in sharply. Enough. This is not the proper method. But it's correct, a voice said from the back. James Chen, a quiet boy known for precision, leaned forward. She's using topology principles on an algebraic proof. It's brilliant. Grant's jaw tightened. Mr. Chen, I will decide what is brilliant. Miss Johnson, sit down. Stick to conventional methods in the future. Maya lowered the stylus, but her partial proof glowed on the smartboard like defiance carved in light. Phones snapped pictures. The hierarchy had cracked. After class, as students filed out, Grant's voice sliced the air. Miss Johnson, stay behind. Maya turned slowly. Grant approached, her smile gone. I don't know how you gamed that exam, but you don't belong here. These students were raised for this. You're a political statement, nothing more. I'll see to it that you're exposed. Maya's heart hammered, but she forced her voice steady. I earned my place. You earned nothing, Grant whispered, her breath cold as the marble. You are an accident dressed as triumph, and accidents are corrected. Maya walked out with her head high, but in the hallway her shoulders sagged. She had survived her first class, but the war had only begun. The cafeteria was worse. Chandeliers hung even here, lighting long tables where meals were more banquet than lunch. Trays gleamed with imported fruit, artisan bread, and steaming entrees. Maya opened her backpack and drew out a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. The sight alone drew stares. She ate in silence, pretending not to hear Alex's voice drifting from a nearby table. 3 weeks. That's my bet before she drops out. You're generous, another laughed. I give her 2. Maya took another bite, opened her calculus book, and worked problems in the margins. Each number was a shield. Each equation, a promise. That afternoon, while hurrying to the library, she nearly collided with Mr. Lewis, the school custodian. His mop bucket sloshed as he steadied it, then looked at her. You're the new one, he said, voice low, kind. Yes, sir. He studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Heard you shook them up in there. Don't let it rattle you. Been here 20 years. Every few years, a kid comes along they can't fit into their boxes. They try to break them. Maya blinked. What happens to them? Some break, some bend, and a few... He smiled faintly. A few turn diamonds. You've been under pressure your whole life. Don't stop now. That night, back in her apartment, Maya helped Malik with fractions under the dim light of a single lamp. The academy's marble halls seemed like a dream already fading. But when she looked at her brother's eager face, she knew. She wasn't fighting for herself alone. She was fighting for him, for her mother, for everyone told you don't belong here. The frost had not melted. But beneath it, something fierce was beginning to grow. The announcement came on a Thursday morning, posted on the smartboard in glowing letters. Math team practice, required attendance. Beneath it, in smaller font, all scholarship students must attend. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she read it. There was no mistaking the subtext. This was the next battlefield. By late afternoon, she stood outside the glass doors of the Academy's math laboratory. The room beyond looked more like a technology hub than a classroom. Walls covered in interactive whiteboards, sleek tables arranged in arcs, projectors casting equations across surfaces. It was here the Academy forged its champions, where the state trophies displayed in the hall had been born. Inside, Students lounged with the confidence of veterans. Alex Whitmore leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a half-smile tugging at his lips as though he had been waiting for this moment. James Chen sat a few rows back, notebook open, eyes already fixed on the screen. A dozen others clustered in groups, their voices buzzing with anticipation. Maya hesitated at the threshold. For a breath, she considered turning back. Then she remembered Malik's voice at breakfast. "You'll win for both of us, won't you?" She squared her shoulders and stepped inside. Professor Nathaniel Brooks was already there, standing at the board with sleeves rolled up. Unlike Ms. Grant, he carried no venom in his posture. His gaze swept the room, pausing on Maya with something closer to curiosity than judgment. "Good afternoon, team," he began. "As you know, we are preparing for the Nationals qualifier. Today we'll test not only your knowledge, but your ability to think together." Together. The word sounded almost ironic in this room. He tapped the board, and instantly the surface filled with a dense wall of equations. Integrals layered over combinatorial expansions, sequences bending toward infinity. A collective murmur rippled through the students. Even Alex's smile flickered, though only for a second. "This," Brooks said, "is not solvable by brute force. You must find the structure. Break it down. Decide who takes which piece. You have 1 hour." He stepped back. Silence fell. Then Alex rose, commanding the room with the ease of someone who had never been doubted. "All right, listen up. I'll take the core integral. Chen, you handle the series expansions. The rest of you divide the combinatorics." His eyes landed on Maya last. "And you, just watch. Try not to slow us down." Snickers followed. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she said nothing. She simply opened her notebook, pen poised, and studied the wall of numbers. The others bent over their work, pencils scratching furiously. Equations sprawled across their tablets in tangled forests. Alex attacked the integral with precision, but his method was long, grinding, a march through mud. James worked silently, his expansion clean but consuming time. The rest shuffled between pieces, confused. Maya's eyes flicked back and forth across the wall. She didn't see fragments. She saw the whole. The problem was not 15 beasts. It was one organism, breathing in rhythm. Somewhere in that rhythm, a hidden doorway waited. Her pencil moved quickly, sketching arcs, crossing out redundancies. Then she stopped. A symmetry leapt at her, buried under layers of notation. The integral Alex was slogging through mirrored a sequence James was unraveling. If combined, if rotated, half the work would vanish. She glanced up. No one else seemed to notice. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. She tapped her pen twice on the desk, her ritual beat. Then she raised her voice, soft but clear. "You're doubling the work. The integral and the series collapse into each other." Heads turned. Alex froze, irritation flashing across his face. "What are you talking about?" "Here," Maya said, rising to the board. She circled 2 distant terms, drew a line between them, then folded the proof in half with one motion. "They cancel, which means all of this," she slashed through half the problem, "is unnecessary. You can solve the remainder in 10 steps, not 50. For a moment, silence reigned. Then James leaned forward, eyes bright. "She's right. Look, if you map the sequence, the integral reduces immediately. It's elegant." Professor Brooks's eyebrows rose, impressed despite himself, but Alex's jaw tightened. "That's not the assigned method. You're just making it up." "No," Maya said, her voice steady. "I'm listening to what the numbers are already singing." Laughter broke out, half mocking, half astonished. singing numbers. Who talked like that? Yet when they looked back at the board, the truth was undeniable. The impossible problem had unraveled in a single stroke. Brooks clapped his hands once. Excellent. This is what I meant by structure. Well done, Miss Johnson. Maya's heart leapt at the words, but Alex's glare cut deep. His authority had been challenged, and in front of the very person whose approval mattered most. The hour ended with the board cleared, but the room itself remained divided. Some students lingered around Maya, curious now, asking how she had seen it. Others retreated to Alex, their loyalty unshaken, but their whispers uneasy. As the team filed out, Alex stopped by her desk, leaning low so only she could hear. Enjoy your moment, but remember, teams aren't won with parlor tricks. Next time, you'll be exposed. Maya met his eyes. She didn't reply. Instead, she closed her notebook, tapped the spiral twice, and walked out. The evening air outside was sharp, the sky painted in bruised colors of dusk. She hurried to the bus stop, the academy shrinking behind her. In her backpack, the pages of her notebook rustled like wings. At home, Malik waited with a half-finished puzzle spread across the kitchen table. "Did you win?" he asked eagerly. Maya thought of the wall of numbers, of Alex's scorn, of Brooks's quiet smile. She bent down, kissed her brother's head and whispered, "Not yet, but I will." And in that promise lay the seed of everything yet to come. The academy by day was a fortress of polished stone and polished children. But by night, Maya returned to a different world, one of peeling paint, flickering bulbs, and walls that did not judge so long as they were filled with numbers. The bus dropped her at the corner of Jefferson Avenue. The air smelled faintly of diesel and fried food, of cracked asphalt and winter damp. She hurried up 3 flights of stairs in the old building where they lived, her shoes echoing on the chipped concrete. At the top, her mother's tired smile and her brother's eager shout of, "Maya!" met her like warmth after frost. Dinner was simple: rice and beans, a few vegetables, a piece of bread split between 3 plates. They ate quickly, speaking little. Evelyn had another night shift waiting, and Malik had homework that felt to him like mountains. But when the dishes were cleared, and the apartment grew quiet, Maya pulled the box of chalk from beneath her bed and went to the largest wall in their living room. That wall had once been painted beige. Now it was layered with years of her handwriting, smudges of geometry, faded streaks of algebra, fragments of equations that no one else in the building could decipher. To neighbors, it looked like graffiti. To Maya, it was the truest diary she had. She stood before it, tapping 2 fingers against the spiral of her notebook. The ritual steadied her heart. Then she began. Her hand swept quick arcs, sketching a problem she remembered from the day's practice. Only this time, she pushed it further. She inverted variables, tested limits, bent the problem inside out until it revealed patterns none of her classmates had glimpsed. Malik sat cross-legged behind her, watching with wide eyes. "What's that one mean?" he asked. "It means if you think long enough, even chaos has rhythm," Maya replied, drawing a curve that mirrored itself into infinity. Malik grinned, though he only half understood. To him, the wall was magic. Each night he watched his sister fight battles with chalk instead of swords, and somehow always win. But tonight, Maya's movements were sharper. Alex's mocking voice still rang in her ears. Ms. Grant's cold words still pressed on her chest. She felt their doubt like weights tied to her ankles. The only way to cut them loose was to prove, again and again, that she could go further. She wrote until her fingers were white with dust. When the chalk nub broke, she picked another, the air filled with the dry rasp of lines multiplying. Midnight crept past unnoticed. At last, she leaned back, breathing hard, The wall was covered with a forest of symbols, every inch alive. She saw not just answers, but bridges, proofs crossing into each other, paths winding toward truths she couldn't yet name. She felt as though the apartment itself pulsed with their rhythm, like a hidden music waiting to be played. Behind her, Malik had fallen asleep, his head resting on his arm, a toy car still in his hand. Maya placed a blanket over him, brushing a curl from his forehead. He would never know how much she carried him in her equations, every symmetry a reminder of family, every solution a promise that their lives could change. At 2 in the morning, she finally collapsed onto her bed, chalk dust clinging to her sleeves. She whispered to herself, clear, short, beautiful. Then she closed her eyes, seeing numbers even in dreams. The next day at school, fatigue clung to her, but adrenaline carried her forward. Whispers followed her in the hallways. Some students repeated Alex's sneers, calling her shortcut or library girl. Others, quieter, stole glances filled with something closer to awe. In class, Miss Grant found new ways to cut her down. When Maya offered an answer, she interrupted, correcting tone rather than substance. When Maya's solution worked, she called it improper form. The message was clear. No matter how perfect the math, it would never be perfect enough. Still, Maya endured. She wrote her proofs neatly, handed them in, and then, at home, let the walls receive the real music. There, she was free. One evening, James Chen approached her after practice. His voice was tentative, but his eyes were steady. "You see things differently," he said, "like the problems are alive." Maya shrugged. "They are. You just have to listen." James hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You know Alex won't stop. He thinks you're a threat to his leadership. And Grant, she'll use any slip against you." "I don't plan on slipping," Maya replied, though her chest tightened at the thought. "Still," James said softly, "be careful. Diamonds don't form without pressure, but too much pressure. They crack." That night, Maya returned to her wall with renewed determination. She drew not just problems from class, but new ones she invented herself, questions without answers, puzzles no textbook dared to ask. She mapped them in arcs of blue and green chalk, filling the spaces until the wall looked like the night sky itself, each equation a star. Her mother came home late, uniform smelling of antiseptic and fatigue. She paused in the doorway, watching her daughter's silhouette against the glowing constellation of numbers. For a moment, Evelyn's exhaustion lifted. She saw not just a child bent over chalk, but a force the world had not yet named. "Maya," she whispered, setting her bag down, "don't let them take this from you." "They won't," Maya said without turning. Her voice was soft but certain. "They can't. This belongs to me." And as dawn crept pale over the city, she was still there. Chalk in hand, fighting her silent battles. Each mark on the wall was both shield and sword, both wound and healing. She did not yet know that these nights, alone with her wall, armed with nothing but chalk and fire, were forging her for the battles still to come. But already, something unbreakable was taking shape in the quiet hum of her determination. The bus that carried the St. Aurelius team to the regional mathematics tournament was polished, almost absurdly so, its chrome flashing in the morning sun as if to remind every passerby of the wealth it carried. Maya sat near the back, her backpack tucked close, her spiral notebook hidden inside like a secret heartbeat. Outside, the city blurred into strips of brick and winter sky, but inside the bus, the air hummed with rivalry. Alex Whitmore lounged at the front, flanked by his friends, his laughter sharp enough to slice through the murmur of equations being revised and whispered strategies. James Chen sat 2 rows ahead of Maya, head bent over his notes, his calm presence a rare island amid the storm. Maya kept her gaze on the window, her breath fogging faint circles onto the glass. The venue was an auditorium at a nearby university, its walls lined with banners proclaiming decades of champions. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, rows of seats filled with parents, teachers, and teams from across the state. Some wore matching blazers, embroidered with school crests. Others carried themselves with the confidence of dynasties. The St. Aurelius team entered together, heads high, as though the crown already rested on their brows. Maya felt eyes turn toward her. Whispers rippled like static. "That's the scholarship kid. Never last long. Token gesture." She pressed her notebook tighter against her chest and walked on. The competition began with individual rounds. Problems flashed on giant screens, timers counted down, and pencils raced. Maya's hand moved quickly. Sure, her answers boxed cleanly. The rhythm of the test matched the rhythm of her nights at the wall. Fast, certain, like breathing. She finished with minutes to spare, folding her paper with the same quiet care she used to tuck Malik's blanket at night. When scores were announced, a murmur rose. Maya had tied for first. Only Alex stood beside her name on the screen. Alex smirked, leaning close enough for only she to hear. "Enjoy it. Lightning doesn't strike twice." The second phase began, the team round. A single massive problem appeared on the screen, sprawling and jagged, a beast demanding many hands. Teams huddled in clusters, whispering strategies. At St. Aurelius, Alex seized the marker immediately. "All right," he said. "We split it. I'll lead. Chen, you cover combinatorics. The rest follow my steps. And you," he jabbed the marker toward Maya, "stay out of the way. One mistake, and we all fall." Maya clenched her fists, but she said nothing. She bent over her notebook, eyes scanning the board. The problem was a labyrinth, layers of probability feeding into geometry, algebra tangled with number theory. The kind of problem designed not for brute force, but for vision. Alex launched into his attack, filling the board with dense equations. His team scrambled to keep up. The path he chose was long, orderly, but heavy, like dragging stone uphill. Sweat beaded on foreheads. The timer ticked down mercilessly. Maya saw it again, the hidden symmetry, the short road masked beneath the clutter. It was like hearing a melody faint under noise. She tapped her spiral twice, heart racing. She hesitated. Speaking up could cost her everything. Staying silent would cost the truth. "Stop!" she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the scribble of chalk. The team froze. Alex turned, fury flashing in his eyes. "What?" "You're wasting steps." "Look!" She rose, her hand shaking but sure as she took the marker. She circled a term at the beginning, linked it to one near the end, and in 2 strokes the clutter collapsed into a simpler form. Gasps rose around them. Maya moved faster now, folding the problem in half like paper, exposing its hidden skeleton. In under 5 minutes, she had carved through what Alex's method would have taken an hour to complete. The room fell silent. Even the timer seemed to pause. Then the proctor announced, "St. Aurelius, correct solution." Applause erupted, scattered at first, then swelling. Cameras flashed. Judges exchanged startled looks. Maya stepped back, her heart pounding so loud she could hear little else. She wanted to vanish, to run back to the safety of her chalk wall, but she stood her ground. Alex's face was pale with anger. He snatched the marker back, his jaw tight. "You think one shortcut makes you a leader? Don't fool yourself. Teams aren't won with tricks." James spoke quietly from behind him. "That wasn't a trick. That was vision." The words hung heavy. The team split between silence and reluctant nods. Alex turned away, but the crack in his command had been heard by all. When final scores were announced, St. Aurelius placed first, advancing to nationals. But in the hallways afterward, the whispers were different now. Some still mocked, but others carried wonder. Did you see what she did? Never seen anyone fold a problem like that. She might actually be... Maya ignored them all. She found a quiet corner, pulled out her lunchbox, and ate her apple slowly. Her hands still trembled, not from fear but from the release of it, the adrenaline fading. She thought of Malik, of her mother, of the wall back home waiting for her chalk. Professor Brooks found her there. He said nothing at first, only sat beside her, watching the crowd disperse. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know what you did today?" "I solved a problem," Maya said. "No," Brooks replied, his voice low. "You revealed one. You showed that the path we take matters as much as the answer. That beauty itself can be proof. Few see that. Fewer still dare to declare it in public." Maya looked down at her apple. "It won't matter. Grant hates me. Alex hates me. They'll never let me belong." Brooks turned his gaze toward the stage where trophies gleamed under lights. "Belonging is overrated. Transformation, however, that's rare. And today, you transformed the room." For the first time, Maya felt a glimmer of something larger than survival. A sense that her chalk-stained nights, her whispered equations, might one day echo beyond walls of marble or concrete. That evening, back in their apartment, she drew the regional problem across her wall, Malik watching wide-eyed. She showed him how the long road collapsed into the short, how noise could become music. And when he clapped his small hands in delight, she thought, if even he understands, then the truth cannot be denied. The frost on the windows had not melted, but inside, a light burned brighter than ever. The regional victory had stunned everyone except Maya herself. She knew the numbers had always been waiting, whispering their symmetries in the quiet of her nights. But St. Aurelius Academy was not a place that celebrated surprise. It was a place that guarded tradition, and tradition had begun to see her as a threat. 2 weeks later, the team boarded a train to the capital for nationals. The journey itself felt ceremonial. Outside the window, fields blurred into forests, forests into towns, towns into the cold steel lines of the city. Inside the carriage, students lounged in plush seats, their laughter rippling like champagne bubbles. Alex commanded the front row, telling stories of past nationals as though they were his personal legends. His friends laughed too loudly, performing for him. Maya sat by the window again, notebook balanced on her knees. The rhythm of the train soothed her, each clack of the rails reminding her of chalk taps against her wall. James sat across from her, quiet as usual, his pencil scratching through problems without pause. Once he glanced up, caught her eye, and gave a faint nod. It was the only encouragement she needed. When the train pulled into Union Station, the Capitol unfurled before them like a city carved for monuments. White stone buildings gleamed, flags rippled in cold wind, and streets stretched wide enough for parades. The hotel where they stayed was no less imposing. Chandeliers dripping with crystal, carpets so thick each step felt muted. Maya had never walked on floors that gave instead of resisted. She wondered if comfort itself could be a trap. At the opening ceremony, teams from across the nation filled the grand hall. Some wore blazers embroidered with ivy leaves, others with crests passed down for generations. They moved with the certainty of inherited victories, their voices carrying the lilt of entitlement. When Maya walked in behind the St. Aurelius banner, she felt the weight of their stares. She heard the whispers ripple again. Who's the girl? Where's she from? A scholarship kid? On stage, the announcer's voice echoed, celebrating the tradition of excellence, the continuation of legacy. Maya stood still, hands at her sides, her spiral notebook hidden in her bag like a secret flame. Legacy, she thought, was nothing more than repetition. She hadn't come to repeat. She had come to rewrite. The days before the competition blurred into long hours of practice. The problems were harder, denser, crafted not just to test knowledge, but to grind endurance. Alex pushed the team relentlessly, his leadership sharp, commanding, but increasingly brittle. Every time Maya suggested an alternative approach, he dismissed it. "That's not the method. Don't gamble with our score." His friends echoed him, but James often glanced at Maya's notes, recognizing their precision. One evening, after hours in the hotel's study room, Maya lingered when the others left. She stayed before the whiteboard, rewriting the day's problem in her own hand. She folded it, twisted it, let it collapse into its hidden symmetry. She solved it in 5 lines. She felt the familiar rush, the same as when a song resolves, when discord finds harmony. Behind her, a voice spoke. "They don't deserve you." She turned. James stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. Maya shook her head. "It's not about deserving. It's about proving. If I can't stand here, they'll say no one else like me ever should." James's gaze softened. "Then prove it. But don't let them turn you into what they want. You're strongest when you're yourself." Maya looked back at the board, at the 5 lines glowing under fluorescent light. She thought of her wall back home, of Malik watching with wide eyes. She nodded. The Nationals began on a bitterly cold morning. Snow drifted against the steps of the convention center, catching in the scarves of families who came to watch. Inside, the air was heavy with expectation. Teams took their places at long tables, nameplates gleaming. Cameras rolled. Judges in dark suits watched from a raised platform. The first rounds were brutal. Problems stretched like endless corridors designed to consume every ounce of time. Teams scribbled furiously, hands cramping, erasers worn down to stubs. Alex barked orders, keeping the St. Aurelius team in rigid formation. For hours, Maya followed his commands, solving pieces quickly and sliding them across the table. But then came a problem that broke the pattern. It was a geometry puzzle wrapped in algebra, a trickster of a question. Alex attacked it with brute force, writing line after line until the table was cluttered with half-solutions. Time bled away. The scoreboard above them ticked mercilessly. Maya saw it, the fold hidden in the chaos, the one elegant move that made all the clutter vanish. She tapped her spiral twice against the table, her hand hovered. She could remain silent and watch the team stumble, or she could cut through the noise and risk Alex's wrath. She took the marker. "Stop," she said firmly. "This isn't the way." Alex spun on her. "Sit down." She ignored him. Her hand moved quickly, circling 2 terms, drawing a diagonal, collapsing the puzzle into a simple truth. Gasps rose from nearby teams. In less than 2 minutes, the problem was solved. The proctor confirmed their answer. Points flashed on the screen. St. Aurelius jumped ahead. For a moment, the hall buzzed with shock. Whispers grew into a hum. Who is she? How did she see that? Alex's jaw clenched. His authority had been fractured in the glare of the spotlight. He leaned close, voice a whisper sharp as glass. "You'll regret this." Maya met his eyes. "Maybe." But the numbers won't. The round ended with St. Aurelius near the top of the leaderboard. Cameras followed them as they left the stage. Reporters crowded near, microphones thrust forward. For the first time, they weren't asking Alex the questions. They were asking Maya. "How did you spot that symmetry so quickly? Where did you learn that method?" Are you the team's secret weapon? Maya froze, unsure what to say. Then she thought of her mother, of Malik, of the chalk wall at home. Listen, she said softly. Numbers don't lie. They're always singing, if you pay attention. Her words spread quickly. Quoted in posts and headlines. Some mocked her, calling her the girl who hears music in math. But others repeated it with wonder, as though it had cracked open something forgotten. That night, in the quiet of the hotel, Maya stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She pressed her spiral notebook against her chest. She knew the battle was far from over. Alex would not forgive the humiliation. Ms. Grant, somewhere back at the academy, would sharpen her knives. The Nationals had just begun. But she also knew this. The world had seen her. Not as a scholarship case, not as an accident, as a voice. And voices, once heard, are hard to silence. Snow swirled against the glass, glittering like chalk dust in the wind. Maya closed her eyes and whispered her mantra. Clear, short, beautiful. Tomorrow, the storm would grow. But tonight, she allowed herself a single truth. She belonged. By the third day of Nationals, exhaustion clung to every team like smoke. Faces were pale, hands blistered from hours of scribbling. Even the confident laughter of dynasties had thinned into nervous silence. But Maya Johnson felt something else stirring inside her. Not fatigue, but a gathering fire. As if every sleepless night before her chalk wall had prepared her for this exact moment. The morning began with a murmur of anticipation. Judges whispered among themselves. Teachers shifted uneasily in their seats. The final round was unlike the others. It was not a series of problems, but a single, monumental challenge. On the massive screen, a question appeared. More theorem than exercise, sprawling across 3 panels, a labyrinth of geometry, algebra, and number theory intertwined. It was the kind of problem whispered about in universities, the kind that left even experts pacing halls at midnight. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Some students froze, pencils suspended in midair. Others bent immediately to their papers, desperate to make sense of the riddle. Alex seized the marker with practiced authority, shoulders squared. "We'll do this systematically," he barked, dividing the problem into fragments. His voice shook slightly, but no one dared mention it. He began writing furiously, filling the whiteboard with long calculations. The rest of the team followed, scrambling to keep pace. Maya sat still, her eyes fixed on the problem as a whole. The lines on the board blurred. She tapped her spiral notebook twice, steadying her breath. To her, the problem was not an enemy to be dissected, but a landscape waiting to be seen from above. She traced invisible patterns in the air with her finger, watching how one curve mirrored another, how contradictions folded into symmetries. Slowly, a shape emerged, an elegant skeleton hidden beneath the clutter. Minutes bled into half an hour. Sweat beaded on foreheads. Erasers squealed. Alex's path grew longer, tangled, his jaw clenched with stubborn determination. He muttered to himself, forcing the problem to yield. But the harder he pushed, the more the numbers resisted, growing heavier, slower. Maya felt time slipping. If she waited, they would drown in half-finished pages. If she stood, she risked humiliation and Alex's fury before the entire nation. Her heart pounded. She thought of her mother's tired hands, of Malik's wide eyes at the chalk wall, of Mr. Lewis's quiet words. A few turned diamonds. She rose. "Stop," she said, her voice carrying across the stage. The team froze. Alex spun around, eyes blazing. "Not now!" "Yes, now." Maya's voice shook at first, then steadied. You're walking in circles. The problem isn't asking for brute force, it's asking to be seen. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some parents leaned forward, intrigued. The judges exchanged glances. Alex sneered. You think you can do better? Then prove it. He shoved the marker toward her. Maya took it. Her hand trembled only once before she touched the board. Then, with a few swift strokes, she circled two distant expressions, drew a line between them, and folded the entire mess into a clean relationship. Gasps rose. She moved faster now, each line of chalk like a violin bow cutting across strings. Equations collapsed into simplicity. Contradictions melted into symmetry. The labyrinth unraveled into a path so direct it seemed impossible no one had seen it before. She's using duality, James whispered to himself, astonished. She's turning the whole problem inside out. The room had fallen silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the board. Maya's voice grew steady as she wrote. The question isn't about solving each fragment. It's about realizing their reflections. Once you see that, the rest follows. She wrote the final line. The proof ended not in clutter but in a single, elegant equation, glowing on the board like a revelation. She stepped back, breathing hard. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the head judge rose slowly to his feet. His voice trembled with awe. Correct. Completely correct. The silence shattered. The auditorium erupted in applause, a roar that shook the walls. Cameras flashed like lightning. Students who had mocked her stared with open mouths. Teachers leaned forward, whispering to each other with stunned admiration. Maya stood frozen, the marker still in her hand. She had imagined this moment in her dreams, chalk dust filling the air as applause thundered. But now that it was real, it felt almost unreal, as though she had stepped into a story larger than herself. Alex stood pale, his fists clenched at his sides. For once, words deserted him. The authority he had worn like armor cracked in front of everyone. The team no longer looked to him. They looked to her. James broke the silence on stage. That wasn't just a solution, he said softly. That was music. The applause grew louder, echoing in Maya's chest like a heartbeat. She looked into the crowd and for a moment thought she saw her mother's face, eyes wet with pride. She imagined Malik watching somewhere, clapping his small hands. She wanted to cry, but instead she whispered to herself, clear, short, beautiful. When the final scores were tallied, St. Aurelius was announced the national champion. But the headlines that night did not belong to the Academy, or to Alex, or to tradition. They belonged to a girl from Detroit, a scholarship kid who had turned a monster of a problem into a song. Reporters swarmed her in the hallway afterward, microphones flashing, questions spilling over each other. How did she see it? Where had she learned? Who had taught her? Maya smiled faintly, clutching her spiral notebook close. No one taught me, she said. The numbers were always there. I just listened. Her words would be quoted across newspapers, shared online, debated in classrooms. Some would call her arrogant. Others would call her a prodigy, but for Maya, they were simply true. That night, in the quiet of the hotel room, she opened her notebook and wrote the problem again, this time in her own hand, folded neatly into the 5 clean lines that had changed everything. She stared at them until her vision blurred, then closed her eyes. Outside the window, the Capitol glittered with lights. Inside, Maya whispered the same mantra that had carried her through every storm. Clear, short, beautiful. And for the first time, she felt that the world itself was beginning to hear it too. The applause faded, but its echo lingered like thunder rolling away over distant hills. Nationals had crowned St. Aurelius champion. Yet the trophy gleaming under stage lights was not what people remembered. What they carried home was the sight of an 11-year-old girl folding chaos into elegance, turning a hall of doubt into a hall of awe. For Maya, the days after the victory blurred into flashes of light and voices. Reporters chased her down corridors, microphones thrust into her face. Articles appeared online calling her the Detroit Proof, a phrase that spread faster than she could comprehend. Some wrote with admiration, others with suspicion, but all spoke her name. She had become undeniable. Alex vanished into the background, his smile gone, his shoulders taut with humiliation. Ms. Grant issued a curt statement praising team discipline, but never mentioned Maya directly. Yet the silence itself revealed the truth. Their narrative had cracked, and through it, something new had entered. On the train ride home, Maya sat by the window, forehead pressed to the glass. The trophy rested in a case at the front of the carriage, guarded as though it were a crown. Around her, the other students dozed, exhaustion heavy on their bodies. Only James remained awake, scribbling in his notebook, occasionally glancing at her. At last he spoke. "You know everything's changed now." Maya shook her head. "Not for them. They'll still see me as an accident." "Maybe," James said. "But the rest of the world saw what you did. That doesn't vanish. You can't erase music once it's been played." Her chest tightened. She thought of the wall back home, the chalk dust on her hands, the nights she had whispered solutions into darkness. She had always believed those battles were invisible. Now she realized they had been preparing her to step into the light. When the train rolled into Detroit, the platform was crowded. Neighbors, teachers from her old public school, even strangers from the community had come. They held signs. South Side strong. Numbers don't lie. She belongs. Evelyn stood at the center, tears streaming. Malik on her shoulders, waving both arms wildly. Maya stepped off the train, and for the first time in her life, she felt no weight pressing her down. She was lifted by the voices around her, by the truth that she was no longer fighting only for herself. The following weeks brought more than she could absorb. Universities sent letters, some promising mentorships, others full scholarships years before she would even be eligible. Journalists wanted profiles. Politicians invoked her name as proof that talent is everywhere. The noise threatened to drown her, but each night she returned to her wall. The chalk waited. The rhythm steadied her. She wrote the National's problem over and over, not to boast, but to remind herself. Beauty begins in silence. It was not only her life that shifted. At St. Aurelius, trustees convened in urgent meetings. Pressure from the press, from parents, from donors forced them to act. Within a month, the Academy announced a new initiative, the Johnson Scholars Program, offering full scholarships to promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. Maya's name was carved into policy, her victory transfigured into a doorway for others. When the announcement was made, Ms. Grant's smile was thin as paper. But Professor Brooks stood behind Maya, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, his eyes glimmering with pride. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. "You've shifted the current. Never forget that." Maya nodded, though her heart was trembling. She did not crave power, or headlines, or monuments. She craved the quiet certainty of Malik's eyes when he watched her write, the sound of her mother's laugh when fatigue briefly loosened its grip. But if her work had opened a path, she would walk it, not for herself alone, but for every child told you don't belong here. The summer came. On warm evenings, Maya sat with Malik on the roof of their building, pointing out constellations and turning them into equations only they understood. Sometimes she brought friends from St. Aurelius, James, a few others who had crossed the invisible line between suspicion and respect. They laughed together, ate cheap popsicles, and for once, the air felt easy. One night, Malik leaned against her shoulder and asked, "When you solved that big problem, what did it feel like?" Maya thought for a long time. She remembered the silence before the board, the way the hall had held its breath, the sudden clarity when the path appeared. "It felt," she said softly, "like finding a door where everyone else saw a wall." Malik grinned. "Then you'll keep finding doors." And she believed him. Years later, people would still speak of the moment an 11-year-old girl from Detroit silenced a hall of champions. Some would call it the beginning of a movement, others the rebirth of a discipline too long trapped in ivory towers. For Maya, it remained something simpler. It was the night she proved that beauty belonged to anyone who listened hard enough to hear it. The frost on her city's windows had not vanished. Poverty still pressed close, prejudice still waited in halls of marble. But within her, and now within others, something stronger had taken root. Clear, short, beautiful. The mantra she had whispered against the dark had become a chorus, and from that chorus, a new future had begun.